We saw in the previous video that there are 6 possible reasons why a business may see its average costs fall as it increases its output. And the result of that would be that it benefits from a downward sloping average cost curve like this. And we've said that this is called economies of scale. Now, those are great, but there comes a point actually where a business becomes too big and actually the output increases too much. And what happens with these is that we start to suffer from diseconomies of scale, which is what this video is going to talk about. And diseconomies of scale means that as the business continues to increase output, actually the average costs then start to rise again. And what that does is it generates a U-shaped curve like this. So what we end up with, just get rid of this so we don't confuse ourselves, is a U-shaped average cost curve like this. And on the downward sloping bit over here, we have economies of scale as average costs fall, and that's true up until about here on this diagram. And then we have a brief period where the average costs are basically constant, and then after that we have a period where we have diseconomies of scale and the average costs start to rise again. So let's think about why this might happen. Well, what happens as the business increases its output is it's going to be becoming more complicated. Increasing its output, it may well involve opening new facilities, it may possibly involve overseas expansion, opening in new geographical areas, those sorts of things. And actually, the fact that it's doing those things may actually start to make it less efficient in terms of its average costs. And there are a few kind of common examples that we talk about here, which are the reasons for diseconomies of scale. The first one is communication. As the output of the business increases and the business gets larger and more complicated, communications become more challenging. It may well be more time consuming. I'm sure you may well have experienced kind of email inbox overload as the businesses grow and the communication becomes ever larger. It can start to waste workers' time to deal with all of those communication flows, and that's going to increase average cost. Related to it, specifically if we're talking about overseas expansion and so on, there can be language barriers, which may necessitate, for instance, employing translators and things like that. Now, those translators obviously will increase the average cost, but won't directly contribute to output, which will mean that they constitute a diseconomy of scale. It's also possible that as the business gets larger, the individual workers feel a bit more detached from the leadership. When a business is small, you may well feel like you're very much a key player. You have a very important role to play within that business. As the business gets larger and larger and output grows greater and greater, it's possible that workers might become a little bit more demotivated. If they're becoming demotivated, then the chances are that will reduce their productivity. As we saw in previous videos, productivity, which will increase the average costs per unit of output. And the final one is admin or bureaucracy. And this is simply, as businesses become bigger and more complicated, there are ever-increasing burdens on paperwork, bureaucracy, filing, recording, all of those sorts of things. What do these mean? Well, it means that actually we have to employ staff just to do those admin roles. And obviously, employing staff to do those admin roles, again, means that they are not contributing directly to output, but they are obviously increasing the costs for the business, and that's going to make the average costs rise. So there are a number of reasons why a diseconomy of scale may occur. If we just look at our diagram again very quickly, we see that we've got this kind of downward sloping economies of scale section on the left, up until Q. And then between Q and Q1, we have constant average costs, or what we call constant returns to scale. And then from Q1 onwards, we have diseconomies of scale. Now, one other important point that we need to identify here is what we call the minimum efficient scale. The minimum efficient scale. And this is really, as the name would suggest, this is the lowest minimum, the minimum output that we can produce and still be efficient. What that means is, what is the lowest output level that we can produce at where average costs are at their lowest point. Now, average costs are at their lowest all the way from Q all the way up to Q1, so this entire little section in here. But what is the lowest possible output level where we can generate those lowest levels of average cost? The lowest possible output level is here at Q. So although we are at the lowest possible level of average cost all the way from Q to Q1, the minimum efficient scale is the first point here at which that average cost line bottoms out. So Q is our minimum efficient scale. Why does that matter for a business? That should form some form of goal or target for them if productive efficiency is what they are aiming for. So that video briefly goes through what diseconomies of scale are, why they might be caused, and how they relate also to economies and minimum efficient scale. Just very, very quickly, though, to remind that the definition here is key. It's an increase in average costs as output rises. I made a big point in my previous video, and I'll repeat it here. You must say this word average here. Otherwise, that makes your definition incorrect. The important thing here is that this is about unit costs, average costs, so you must refer to that. Referring to overall costs is not valid in an answer about economies and diseconomies of scale.